It is time for Pet Files Ask the Vet, underwritten by the Millerton Veterinary Practice. Traditional small animal medicine and surgery, chiropractic, laser therapy, acupuncture, and Chinese herbal medicine. 518-789-3440, millertonvet.com. With us today, Dr. Carolyn Cannon, owner and chief vet at the Millerton Veterinary Practice. She joins us when we can. We are always delighted. Hello, Dr. Cannon.
Good morning, Jill and Marshall.
Was that a mouthful?
That was. You did really well.
Thank you. Only one crack up. Oh, well. Lori, shall we get to the questions, or would you like to discourse?
I don't want to talk about the weather.
Okay, fair enough. Do you want to talk about
and I'm not
updates?
Not qualified to talk about the weather either, so I think I'd best go to the animals.
All right. Lori and Morgan in Saugerties. We took our dog Elsie, a spayed 5-year-old cardigan corgi, for a checkup last week. She had put on 3 pounds since her last visit. The vet didn't mention it, but we want to double-check. Is that an okay weight gain for a small dog? Do they put on a bit of weight as they age? Elsie looks pretty trim to us, but we've had corgis before, and we know it's important to keep their weight in check.
Good question. Corgis are hard to tell sometimes because they are so long and they put on weight insidiously. But they need to as they get older, or it would be preferable for them to have a little bit of a waist still, which usually goes away by the time they're 2. So for a corgi at 5, unless she's doing a lot of exercise and putting on muscle, because muscle weighs more than fat, then you're right to be concerned and to question whether that is too much. 3 pounds seems like too much to me to gain. The leaner that you keep your dog as she ages, the fewer problems you will have, such as osteoarthritis. And then there's a whole host of other potential metabolic problems as they get older. So keeping a dog lean, you should be able to feel those ribs easily, not see them, but be able to feel them, and having a little bit of a waist in the middle. So you stand over her and look, and she shouldn't go in at the sides. Super important, especially with those little short legs that are more prone to osteoarthritis. Corgis can also get degenerative nerve diseases, et cetera, like degenerative myelopathy. So, it's difficult when the metabolism slows down, and they really learn to work you for the food.
When does the metabolism? When does it start?
Well, dogs typically they'll fill out until they're 2 years old, and so they'll be developing more muscle. And the depends, of course, whether they're spayed or neutered, and whether we have a female or a male. So the females are much more likely at any age to put weight on as they get older. So if I think that when they're 2 years old, 2.5, and they look fit, then try to keep their weight at that point, right around that same point, which means lots of exercise.
I was quite struck watching Westminster, since the only alternative was politics, this past go round, and some of the dogs were absolutely gorgeous. All the dogs were gorgeous, but I'm talking weight-wise. And then the Labrador looked like it had gotten into the cookies the night before. And the Ben & Jerry's. Right. And I thought, well, Yeah,
they like them to be roly-poly, even as puppies. They come in overweight a lot of times. I guess that's breed standard. If you have a hunting lab, then you want to have that sleek look. But it's not necessarily good for them.
What, the sleek look or
the other, the roly-poly, lots of abdominal fat.
Yeah, I saw that. And I remember the time many years ago where I showed up to pick up a puppy with a dog who was in dire need of a diet, and if looks could kill, I think the breeder would have just burnt me. It was just. I had to come back, and the dog had to lose weight, and that was that. But it was a lesson, and I have become in my old age, I've become pretty attuned to a dog that can lose a couple of pounds, which doesn't make me popular amongst my friends, but that's there.
Right,
it
your
is.
dog friends.
Well, my dog friends, yes, but the humans not so much.
It's really hard. It's really, really, really hard not to feed a Labrador too much.
Yeah, and it's really I can tell
They
you,
always think that they're starving.
they're sure.
They don't have that little check and balance to tell them that. They don't have that negative feedback to say, my stomach is really, really full. I shouldn't eat anymore. They still eat.
And anyway, look at that one at the very fancy dog show. I'm thinner than that. Give me more.
I missed the dog show, and I was very sad about that. But
it was I don't know. It was quite it was quite delightful. Yeah,
I love watching it.
Yeah, there's just and some of those dogs are all of those dogs. Each one, their little personalities. I will say this: the winner was the poodle. I am in my zillionth decade, and I still don't get it with that cut. I still don't. I don't. I mean, it's pretty obvious that I never will. But yeah, to each his own. Mm-hmm. Maitland in Brooklyn, I saw a pup on the street the other day that was walking in the strangest way. All four legs seemed to be prancing in different directions with every step. Its head seemed to be swaying a little too. The closest way I can describe it is that it looked like it was dancing down the street, or like a marionette on strings. But obviously it's some kind of medical condition. I didn't want to ask its owner, but I'm really curious. It looked like a doxy or a doxy mix.
So that's tricky. That could be a number of different musculoskeletal problems, but with the head swaying too, there is a thing called cerebellar hypoplasia. The cerebellum is the part of the brain that's responsible for your intentional movement, and I have seen occasionally dogs, more cats born with cerebellar hypoplasia, meaning the cerebellum part of the brain is not fully developed. And they can walk, but they don't have a lot of control over the walk. So that might be what you're seeing. If the owner didn't seem, clearly didn't seem alarmed at the way their pet was walking, then it's got to be a chronic condition. So it's possibly a brain problem, but also potentially a muscle problem. With dachshunds, of course, they get the spinal cord injury. Usually that just affects the hind end because it's in the lumbar spine, the thoracic or lumbar spine. They'll get disc disease, and the disc material injures the spinal cord. So typically that back end will wander all over the place if they recover from that and not have to be in a cart. So what is described here by Maitland, I think, is more than that. So some sort of neurologic disease that probably isn't progressive if the dog's able to has been able to compensate and move along in a forward mashed fashion. So interesting.
Right. But as you say, as long as the owner wasn't fussed, they had to be used to it.
Yeah, so that there wasn't anything sudden, right, suddenly happen. It's probably something that amazing that dogs can compensate, and so cool that it's been described as prancing or dancing. That means that it sounds to me like this dog was not bothered by it at all.
Right, and if that's the case, then
Yeah, wonderful.
Right. John and Rhinebeck, it seems to me that the general stance of the veterinary establishment is that feeding dogs homemade dog food is dangerous, on the grounds that lay people cannot be relied upon to accurately provide a dog with the proper nutrients. I find this baffling. In the absence of human care, dogs are scavengers that survive on literal garbage. And in the long arc of their existence as domestic animals, they only started to eat commercially produced dog food in the 1940s. Moreover, since 1956, their primary food source has been kibble, most of which is pure junk. As a professional, this is a test. Can you explain why, if dogs are such delicate creatures, have they had the same lifespans no matter what the latest thinking on what should go into their food?
Well, number one, I beg to differ about the same lifespans. I don't believe that is the case. Dogs are living a lot longer now. Certainly dogs who have good veterinary care are living a lot longer. So what I will say to that is that lay people can't be relied upon to feed themselves very well in order to maintain good health. So why would we give them the choice to do that with their pets? A lot of people are not able to. You can look around you, feed themselves so that they have good quality life into old age, right? It takes exercise and it takes good food, and it takes not eating a whole lot of junk. And so that being said, I think that homemade dog food is becoming a lot more common. Now there are companies making homemade dog food, and the idea, I guess, is that you have those diets formulated by a veterinary nutritionist because dogs' requirements are not the same as they are for people. So I think the idea is not necessarily the homemade dog food, because that's better. The fresh food, of course, is better for anybody than having processed food. The important thing is that a person who's formulating their own diet, number one, understands that their requirements are not the same as they are for humans, and that the diet needs to be balanced, or at least, in the very least, ingredients switched around so that we don't get deficiencies.
And this is, I think, where, I know John didn't ask me, he wanted to ask a professional, but as also a layperson who feeding, your point at the beginning about people being able to feed themselves or take care of themselves is the most important, because unless you are dealing with someone who's obviously okay and physically well, you can't be certain that they are not imposing on their beloved fur babies the issues that they themselves have. And I'm thinking of my father, who never had a thin dog, speaking of which, and whose dog only thinned when someone else started taking care of him, and was said, well, actually, you shouldn't fill the bowl up like Snoopy's supper dish with a little, a mound on top of it. He should have a fraction of it, because anytime that was imposed in the kitchen, my dad would come along and say, you're underfeeding the dog, and would, pull out 3 chickens and throw it in the bowl. So it's really tricky. And
it is tricky if you want optimal health. Dogs absolutely can subsist on scavenging.
Yep.
And they're pretty good at it. But when they're scavenging, they also have the opportunity to eat a variety of foods. So they're not being thrown. What I see is that people take that it's okay to feed your dog, what you eat, and basically what they're feeding their little 10-pound Chihuahua is diced chicken every day, diced white meat chicken, and that's all they have. That's all they ever get, except for maybe some milk bones. So it's that kind of thing that is seen frequently, and so it's really, guidance, depending on what size your dog is, what breed your dog is, how old they are, and how many calories they're burning. Letting people decide what to feed them is not always the best idea. Although, is it preferable to, processed kibble? That's a question that's also individualized, I guess. It depends on what you're feeding. So, if your dog's only getting meat in the bowl, that's not good enough.
Right. And I just remember ages. Somebody very proudly gave me cat food. Oh, make your cat vegetarians. Delicious vegetarian recipes for your cat.
Yeah.
And
amino acids. You could get the amino acids. You can get the amino acids from vegetables, quote unquote, like corn and soybeans, but you can't. The parts don't equal the whole.
Yeah. And it's just that there have been massive strides also in doggy nutrition, and there's some foods that are out there that are pretty interesting, and if you do want to pursue it, or if you want to make your own, then you just definitely need to start swatting the books and find out what your dog has to have.
And there are veterinary nutritionists out there now, lots of them, who will formulate a diet for your dog. not inexpensive, but it is a you have this resource that you can talk to maybe for a couple of weeks and different times, figure out what you can do to make your dog's diet, and then you've got that diet for years.
Yep.
So it may cost you $500, but
it's worth it, and then you've basically done something.
Yeah, and then you have myollie.com, or I think it's myollie that has a veterinary nutritionist formulate their food. One of the, maybe more than one, but if you're going to use one of those online order the food programs, then you do want to make sure that you have a veterinary nutritionist who's formulated the diet. Right.
And then there's also a whole other thing that you should be aware of, which, of course, not you, obviously, Dr. Cannon, but is that food. There are a lot of veterinarians out there, and I just had this with my brother, as a matter of fact. The puppy is itchy, but according to his vet, it couldn't have anything to do with the food. And, there are certain connections that have been made in this is California of all places. So there are certain things that have been, certain connections that have been made in the wellness department that haven't necessarily trickled down. So if you don't know to ask or to insist, then, you might not get the guidance that you need.
Right.
And that's.
And when I was a kid, we fed our dogs what we ate, and they didn't live very long. I had one, Heidi lived to be 9, and she died of hepatitis, and Coco only lived to be 7. She died of esophageal cancer.
Yeah, and you don't know whether it was.
Yeah, so whether they had an optimal diet or not, they had a whole lot of love, and they had a whole lot of attention and exercise.
Yeah, it's balance in all things.
And that, of course, is anecdotal.
Yes.
Anecdotal evidence, which sticks with you.
Because as a kid, you watch these things, and then you become a veterinarian. Some of us become a veterinarian. Some of us just have parents and step-parents who say, well, when are you going to vet school? And it's like, never soon enough. All right, Whitney in Bridgeport. Okay, so I will try to be delicate in the way that I put this. But I have been watching videos about how to express the glands under a dog's tail. I know it's seriously gross, but I'm broke, so it seems the way to save some bucks. However, the only point of doing it is that my dog has been scooting. If he's scooting, that means they're impacted, right? And so if they're impacted, is it safe to do it myself, or is that a job for a vet? Because we can tell that Whitney does not want to really do it herself.
I don't think anybody really wants to do it. So these are called anal glands. We call them anal glands, and they, they are near the anus, the anal sphincter. And if you look at if the anal sphincter was a clock, how many people say that on your show?
Not many.
Then right around 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock, there are these. They're actually sacs. They're small sacs, and the lining of the sac produces an odoriferous material that should be, when a dog passes a stool, a little bit supposed to come out on the stool, and vestigially, they're vestigial glands. So when the dogs were developing, then evolutionarily, then they marked territory. Dogs still maybe mark their territory this way. But what happens is that our dogs get too overweight at times, or their stools are not as firm as they should be, since they probably evolved on, since dogs evolved on a raw meat diet with bones, etc. You've seen the scat of foxes and coyotes, and you can see that the scat is very dry, and so our dogs have sort of this stool that may not be, that's so compressible so it may not actually push on those anal sacs. So if there's no pressure on the sac, then some of that material won't come out on the stool. And if that's the case, then it can sit in there, and sometimes that tiny little opening gets plugged up with some crusty material, and so that would be an impacted anal sac. And those can be a little bit difficult to express because it's painful. Sometimes a really warm compress can help, but you cannot do this effectively from the outside. You have to put on a glove and put one finger inside the anus and one finger on the outside to try to express the glands. And so you need a little bit of experience with it, which you might get on your own dog if you have a very forgiving pet. So it is doable at home. Now, the other thing is that some of these dogs don't get impacted. It's just that the sac itself is thick and inflamed and overproducing material. And so it's overproducing so much of this material that it kind of leaks out, and so people smell that. Or the dog is irritated by the thickened sac, and so they drag their bum on the floor. And if that's the case, then that issue needs to be addressed by a veterinarian.
Is there any other reason for dragging your bum across the floor?
Other reason, the most common other reason, would be tapeworms. So tapeworms live inside the intestine, and they don't lay eggs. They actually have the eggs in their segments. So it's a segmented worm. The segments are anywhere from a half an inch to an inch long when they're alive. They're very small when they're dried up. But these little segments can break off, and they're still alive at that point, and they crawl out of the anus and trying to sit on the fur and to dry up on the fur of the dog. And so they cause some irritation and cause the dog to drag their bum sometimes.
All right. In Whitney's case, and I think we're out of time, but we've got a couple minutes. But just for Whitney's, who's never done this before, probably it's worth the vet.
Yes, and try to get some instruction. I don't always offer. People ask if they can do this at home, and I do explain to them how to do it, and I then tell them what they can do and get the gloves, et cetera, but they need to be very careful not to cause any harm or to hurt the dog, and I can't say that maybe one person in 30 years has ever continued to do it.
Yeah,
because it's not, your dog gets too upset. Their space is being, invaded
very
at
much
home,
invaded,
and they don't take that very well.
No, and it just becomes it can easily become a thing, and it's not worth making it a thing.
Right.
And I will just say that I watched a lot of instructional videos about how to make a hand roll once, and this was and I was like, oh, I can do this, and I watched and watched and watched, and then I went to the kitchen and. And it looked like my dog had done it.
It's a lot harder. Yeah, it's a lot harder.
And that's something that people, so even if you're watching instructional videos day and night until you've actually, put your glove on and stuck your finger in your, then not been bitten, and done it.
Right.
It's going to be a little bit.
Yeah, and then you have to really be careful that you don't shoot yourself in the face. Make sure you close your mouth when you're expressing those anal glands.
Veterinary horror stories. Oh, there's a book. All right. Thank you very much. This has been Pet Files Ask the Vet, underwritten by the Millerton Veterinary Practice, 518-789-3440, millertonvet.com.
Thank you.